The sonar room was too cold. Not because the air conditioning was set wrong, because the ocean itself was pressing its temperature through the hull like a hand. The operator didn't speak at first. He just stared at the screen. Green arcs, clean lines, a map of darkness made out of sound. Then he did something that made everyone else in the compartment feel it before they understood it. He reached up and pulled one headphone cup away from his ear, as if the sound coming through it had turned personal. "Sir," he said carefully. Not panicked. Worse, controlled. "We've got a return." "A return. That's how you say it when you don't want to give your fear a name." The captain leaned in. "What kind?" The operator swallowed. "It's not biological, it's too geometric." Geometric. You can tell yourself a whale is a curve. You can tell yourself geology is noise. You can tell yourself a false echo is a mistake. But geometry? Geometry suggests intention. The screen showed a shape that didn't behave like rock. It didn't scatter like sediment. It sat, flat, hard, with angles. And then it moved. Not the way something drifts, the way something decides. That moment, right there, is where most ocean floor legends begin. A sensor sees something it can't name. A human mind does what it has always done in the presence of the unknown. It reaches for the biggest story available. A base, a weapon, a machine, an experiment, something non-human. And then the second ingredient arrives. Silence. Because what happens in the deep doesn't get filmed. It gets classified. It gets argued about behind closed doors. It gets written in logs the public never sees. It gets told later in fragments, at bars, in memoirs, on radio shows, in whisper networks. This is a story about those fragments. The ocean floor experiments people swear are real, some grounded in documented history, some stitched together from rumor, fear, and the fact that the seafloor is still one of the least witnessed environments on Earth. And by the end, I want you to walk away with something sharper than belief. A framework. A way to look at any secret ocean experiment claim and ask the right questions. Because whether the claim is true or not, one thing is absolutely true. The ocean floor is where nations do the work they can't do in daylight. But first, we have to get honest about why the ocean floor is such a perfect stage for extreme stories. Down there, at 2 miles, 3 miles, sometimes more, the world is not just dark. It is crushed. Pressure turns ordinary engineering into a moral test. It forces you to choose what you value: redundancy, stealth, strength, or speed. And because it's hard, only a few kinds of people ever go there: military, scientific, industrial. Meaning, the deepest environments are dominated by institutions, and institutions love secrecy, sometimes for good reasons: safety, national defense, proprietary technology, sometimes for the oldest reason of all: control. So when people say there are experiments on the ocean floor, the claim lands on fertile ground. Because the seafloor already is a laboratory, a real one, just not always the kind conspiracy stories imagine. Here are the 3 narrative seeds we're going to plant now, and return to later. Seed 1. The seafloor is an information battlefield. It isn't only about submarines. It's about cables, sensors, acoustic networks, the invisible infrastructure that makes modern power possible. Seed 2. The ocean creates instrument ghosts, thermoclines, currents, biological noise, geological events. The sea can make sensors lie, or rather can make sensors tell partial truths that humans misread. Seed 3. Myths can function as camouflage, not always deliberately. Sometimes a secret stays safe simply because the public version becomes too ridiculous to take seriously. Keep those in your pocket, because every ocean floor experiment story, every single one, touches at least one of those seeds. Now, let's begin with the most real experiment of all, the one almost nobody talks about because it sounds boring, and the boring ones are often the most powerful. Listening. If war ever goes hot between major powers, the deep ocean becomes a place where decisions happen before the surface world even understands a decision is being made. Why? Because submarines. Because deterrence. Because you can't shoot what you can't find. So nations built ears. Not metaphorical ears, literal ones. Hydrophones, arrays, sensors deployed on the seabed and linked by cable. Systems designed to do one thing: hear a machine move through water. This is where the legend machine begins. Because once you accept that listening networks exist on the ocean floor, real, expensive, quiet, largely unpublicized, you've accepted the foundational truth. The seafloor is instrumented, not everywhere, not perfectly, but enough. And once it's instrumented, people start asking the next question. If they can listen, what else can they do? Now we move into the zone where documented history and rumor start to overlap. The undersea black sites, not prisons, not facilities with guards, sites in the original sense of the word. Locations, coordinates, where equipment sits, listens, records, maybe transmits. A sensor node on the seabed is not dramatic, but it does something psychologically explosive. It implies presence. A nation can be there without being seen, and presence is the first half of any experiment. Which brings us to the first category of ocean floor experiments people swear are real. The things that sit down there and watch. You've heard the stories. Fishermen pulling up strange cables, divers seeing unnaturally straight lines, deep-sea ROV pilots catching glimpses of boxes, domes, or structures that don't look like geology. People claiming the seafloor has stations, like a science fiction movie. Here's the grounded version. There are real seabed installations, scientific observatories, seismic sensors, cabled networks, military systems. Some are publicly documented, some are not. And that gap, the space between what is publicly described and what likely exists, is where imagination pours in. Because if you can't see it, you can't refute it. And if the ocean floor is already full of devices, your mind starts to fill it with devices you've never actually witnessed. So how do you tell the difference between a real device and an invented one? Not by deciding what's too crazy, by asking what the device would do. A plausible seabed device does one of four things. It listens, it communicates, it navigates, or it manipulates the environment. Listening, hydrophones, seismic sensors, acoustic arrays. Communication, repeaters, acoustic modems, relay nodes. Navigation, beacons, reference points, mapping aids. Manipulation, decoys, jammers, occasionally experimental sources. The more a story fits one of those functions, the more you treat it seriously. The more it resembles a movie prop, giant doors, alien cities, glowing domes, the more you treat it as either misinterpretation or deliberate myth. Deliberate myth, hold that thought. We'll come back to it. Because the second category is the one that proves how far nations are willing to go in the deep. It's not a rumor, it's documented, and it has a single name that feels like a wink: Glomar. In the 1970s, the United States ran an operation that still sounds like fiction even when you read the historical summaries. A deep ocean recovery mission. A ship built to look like a civilian industrial project. A cover story. A goal sitting miles below the surface. A Soviet submarine. If you're hearing this for the first time, pause and let it register. In an era with far less autonomous technology than today, with less computing power, with less public awareness of what was possible, an intelligence operation aimed to reach down into the deep Pacific and lift something enormous from the seafloor. That attempt, successful in part, according to many accounts, doesn't just tell you what happened, it tells you what can happen. And that's why it matters for our story. Because once you know nations have attempted deep-sea recovery and manipulation at that scale, the ocean floor stops being a romantic void. It becomes accessible, not to everyone, but to those with money, patience, and necessity. Which means a whole new set of experiments people swear are real suddenly becomes plausible. Seafloor retrieval, covert placement, silent tampering, cable interaction, undersea mapping so precise it feels like possession. And this is where things start to get darker. Because the ocean floor isn't only a place to hide, it's a place to touch. Touching the seafloor means interacting with something that belongs to someone else. Cables, sensors, wrecks, infrastructure. When people swear there are ocean floor experiments, many of them are really talking about this. Undersea interference. A cable goes down. A sensor network behaves strangely. A ship is in a region it doesn't usually visit. An undersea vehicle is spotted. A navy issues a vague statement. And the public is left with the most dangerous kind of puzzle. A puzzle with missing pieces. Missing pieces create stories. Now we reach the third category. The one you've been waiting for. The one that gives the title its electricity. The unknowns, USOs, unidentified submerged objects, stories of things moving underwater too fast, too clean, too intelligently, objects that appear on sonar and then vanish, objects that behave like submarines, but not like any submarine we admit exists. This category is where I need to set the rules, because if we do this wrong, it becomes a campfire story. If we do it right, it becomes a psychological and strategic story. Here is what we can say with confidence. The ocean generates unresolved contacts, always. Sonar is not a camera, it's interpretation. The same return can mean different things depending on water conditions. Here is what we can say with caution. Some unresolved contacts are likely advanced human technology. Prototype drones, experimental submarines, decoys, exercises. Here is what we cannot responsibly claim as fact, that any specific unknown is non-human. Because without physical evidence, without verifiable data, you're only telling a story. But, and this is important, stories can still matter, because a Navy's experience of an unknown changes behavior even if the unknown is later explained. It changes how crews interpret returns. It changes training. It changes paranoia. It changes procedure. And in high-stakes environments, changed behavior is real. So instead of pretending we can solve USOs from a distance, we're going to do something smarter. We're going to study the conditions that produce USO stories. And the number one condition is secrecy. Because when an encounter happens in international airspace, at least somebody might film it. But underwater is almost always a classified sensor story, which means the public gets fragments, not raw data, not context. Fragments. Fragments invite myth. Now here's the reveal ladder we're going to climb for the rest of this documentary. First, we'll explore the real ocean floor experiments that have been publicly acknowledged or heavily evidenced. Listening networks, deep-sea recovery, cable interaction, test ranges, undersea drones. Second, we'll examine the experiments that are plausible but unconfirmed, seafloor stations that are actually equipment hubs, persistent nodes, acoustic manipulation tests, infrastructure access rehearsal. Third, we'll step into the experiments that people swear are real, but that live mostly in the ecosystem of rumor, alien bases, hidden doors, underwater cities, and at each step, we'll ask the same question. If this were real, what would it be for? Because purpose is the best detector. Purpose separates fantasy from strategy. Now, before we go further, we need to confront the one thing the ocean does better than any government agency. It hides evidence. A crash site in the desert can be found. A footprint can be photographed. A building can be seen from orbit. But in the deep ocean, wreckage becomes archaeology. The seafloor can swallow a story for decades. Sediment covers, currents scatter, pressure collapses, distance discourages. That is why ocean floor experiment myths are so persistent, because they exist in the perfect condition for belief. Not total darkness, partial visibility, and partial visibility is where humans get dangerous. We don't leave blanks. We fill them. In the next section, we're going to look at the ocean floor as a deliberate laboratory. Not a metaphor, a literal testing environment. Deep-sea explosive tests, underwater acoustics experiments, torpedo and countermeasure trials, submarine stealth validation, autonomous drone endurance missions, and the strange, quiet reality of undersea ranges, places where the ocean is treated like a controlled room, even though it never truly is. Then we'll move into the part where everything flips, the turning point. The moment you realize why so many people swear the experiments are not just real, they swear they're hidden on purpose. Because in the deep, the most powerful experiment isn't what you build, it's what you convince others you can build. And once you see that, you start to understand the ocean floor the way militaries do. Not as a mystery, as leverage. Now we step onto the seafloor the way the people in charge step onto it. Not with flippers, not with romance, with schedules, with budgets, with test plans that treat the abyss like a work site, because the ocean floor is not only a place where secrets can be hidden. It's a place where secrets can be trained, rehearsed, repeated, refined until they stop being ideas and start being doctrine. When you hear ocean floor experiments, your mind goes to the extraordinary. Alien artifacts, ancient ruins, machines that don't match our world. But the machinery of the modern world is already strange enough. A cable the width of your wrist carrying the nervous system of continents. A sensor the size of a suitcase, listening for a vibration you'd never notice. A drone no bigger than a surfboard gliding for weeks through cold layers like a patient animal. None of that looks like a movie. Which is why it's real. And this is where the first real experiment begins. The range. A deep-sea test range is a paradox. It's an attempt to control what can't be controlled. To create a laboratory inside a living, moving, noisy environment, to turn the ocean into a measuring instrument. Picture it. Open water. A few surface buoys that look harmless. But beneath them, beneath the wind and the waves, there is a hidden geometry. Lines of hydrophones, seabed nodes, tracking arrays placed with the precision of a grid. Cables stitched along the floor, buried, routed, protected. If you didn't know it was there, you'd sail right over it. And that's the point. Because the tests aren't meant to be watched. They're meant to be measured. In the range, the ocean becomes a theater with invisible seats. Everything that enters is heard, mapped, timed, cataloged. This is why people swear the ocean floor is full of stations, because from a certain perspective, it is. Not cities, not domes. Stations in the original sense, stations of listening. Stations of tracking, stations of calibration. And here is where the word experiment becomes literal. Because if you want to know how an undersea weapon behaves, you don't just fire it, you fire it under controlled conditions. At a certain depth, in a certain temperature layer, with sensors positioned to catch every moment. That could be a torpedo, it could be a countermeasure, it could be an unmanned vehicle, it could be a propulsion component. It could be something quieter, a new coating, a new pump design, a new way of mounting machinery so it doesn't sing through the hull. Because the ocean hears everything you build. And if you build for war, you build to disappear. Now, let's make this tangible. Let's go into a night test. The kind that doesn't make headlines. The surface ship is running dark, no unnecessary lights. A deck crew moving with practiced silence. The sea is calm, but that calm feels predatory, like it's waiting. A team rolls a cylindrical object towards the stern. It's wrapped, it's tagged, it's treated like a live animal. Not because it's alive, because it contains potential. A technician checks a timing unit, another checks a pressure seal. Someone says, "Range is green," and a voice in the comms replies with a flat calm that always sounds unnatural at sea. "Proceed." The object goes over the side. It sinks, the cable spools, the ocean swallows it so quickly it's almost insulting. You'd think the test is happening on deck, but the test is happening below, where the seabed sensors are already awake, listening, waiting. A countdown begins, not dramatic, just numbers, and then the ocean flexes. A pressure wave moves through water like a smooth punch. A crew member on deck feels it as a dull thud in his chest. Down below, the hydrophones capture it as a signature, a shape in frequency, a fingerprint. That fingerprint gets saved, not as a story, as data. This is the first kind of ocean floor experiment, controlled undersea force, explosive testing, shockwave testing, structural response evaluation. It doesn't have to be nuclear to be significant. In fact, most of it isn't. It's about understanding how energy behaves underwater, because underwater energy is different. It travels, it couples, it reaches farther than people expect. And that matters not only for weapons, but for stealth. Because if you know how sound moves, you know how to hide inside it. Now we shift into the second kind of experiment. Acoustic manipulation. The ocean is an acoustic planet. We live on land, so we forget this. We think vision is primary. Underwater, vision is a luxury. Sound is the real medium, which means the ocean is full of acoustic experiments, some scientific, some military, often both. Experiments that sound innocent. Sound propagation studies, environmental mapping, calibration tests. But in military hands, those studies become advantage. Because if you can predict how sound bends through layers, you can predict how your enemy hears. And once you can predict hearing, you can design deception. This is where the stories start to get strange. Because deception underwater doesn't look like a fake tank on a desert road. It looks like a sound that shouldn't exist, a signature that resembles a submarine, a burst that suggests a platform moving where no platform is, a decoy that creates a phantom target. When people swear they tracked something moving impossibly fast underwater, one possibility, only one, lurks in the background. Not aliens, not magic. A deception experiment. A test of whether an adversary can be made to chase an acoustic ghost. This is where you start to see the deep ocean as a mind game. Because the ocean is not only a hiding place, it is a stage for misdirection. The third kind of experiment is quieter still. Endurance, unmanned undersea systems changed the logic of secrecy. A manned submarine needs food, air, crew cycles, logistics, human limits. A drone doesn't. A drone can loiter. It can glide. It can sleep. It can wake. It can listen. So militaries test endurance the way endurance is always tested, by letting time become the weapon. Imagine an unmanned vehicle dropped over the side at night. No drama. A quiet splash. A handshake with the abyss. Weeks later, it surfaces 100 miles away, or never surfaces at all. That is still a test. Because even failure teaches you what the ocean will tolerate. Endurance tests don't look like battles. They look like routines. A ship surveying, a vessel doing research, a buoy collecting data. But inside the logs, you'll see the real purpose. Path planning, autonomy updates, navigation corrections, sensor drift, power consumption, communication windows. And if you're the kind of person who thinks the ocean floor hides a secret facility, endurance testing is the closest real-world equivalent, because a persistent system on the seabed is, in effect, a presence, not a building, a function. This is where we revisit the idea of seabed stations. A station doesn't need walls. It needs tasks. Listen, store, transmit. That's enough to feel like a base if you stumble upon it, especially if you don't know what it is, especially if you find it by accident. And accidents happen. In shallow water, someone films. In deep water, someone shrugs. And the object disappears into classified channels. Now we move into the category that produces the most intense claims: manipulation of infrastructure. If you want to understand why the ocean floor is treated like a strategic vault, focus on one object: the cable. An undersea cable is not romantic, it's not glamorous. But it is power. It is the corridor where information moves. And if you can touch that corridor, you can influence the surface world without firing a missile. So yes, militaries test capability around cables, not necessarily to attack, often to defend, sometimes to inspect, sometimes to repair, sometimes to prove they can reach. Reaching matters, because in deterrence, the phrase "I can reach you" is more important than "I will strike you." This is where a huge portion of ocean floor experiment mythology grows, because cable operations are inherently quiet. They're technical. They're often conducted under cover stories. They're often wrapped in terms like maintenance and survey. So when a cable goes down and nobody explains why, the mind reaches for an explanation. Sabotage, a test, a covert action. Sometimes the truth is mundane. An anchor, a landslide, a storm. Sometimes the truth is less mundane. A vessel operating too close, a deliberate cut, an operation that will never be admitted. But here's the point for our story. Cable interaction is a real capability domain, which means the ocean floor hosts real exercises that can look like science fiction from the outside. ROVs working like metal insects. Manipulator arms unspooling line. Seafloor mapping so precise it feels like possession. Now we approach the part that people swear is the smoking gun. Straight lines. Perfect circles. Angles on the seabed. If you've spent any time in ocean mystery communities, you know the pattern. A sonar image leaks. A screenshot circulates. Someone draws red circles. Someone says, "Nature doesn't do that." And it's true. Nature rarely does perfect, but humans do, and humans place things on the seabed for reasons that don't require aliens: anchors, moorings, cable routes, sensor arrays, pipeline structures, scientific observatories, wreckage, debris fields, and then the ocean adds its own vandalism. Sediment can smooth, currents can carve, erosion can stylize, which means geometric doesn't equal non-human, it equals needs context. Context is what most viral seafloor images don't provide. So now, we climb into the most emotionally charged category, the category that turns experiments into "they're hiding something." USOs, the underwater unknowns. Here is the honest core of USO stories. They often start the same way. A sonar operator sees a contact that behaves differently. Not fast at first, different. It holds depth in a way a whale doesn't. It turns with an angle that feels mechanical. It accelerates in a way that looks too smooth. It appears where it shouldn't. Then the environment adds confusion. The thermocline bends sound. The ocean noise masks detail. The operator's own platform moves. The contact crosses an acoustic shadow, and suddenly you have a contact that looks impossible. Not because it is impossible, because the picture is incomplete. This is why USO stories are so hard to resolve from the outside, because they live at the intersection of three things: human perception, sensor limitations, and classification. Classification is the accelerant, because it removes the evidence from public review. It removes the context. It removes the chance to correct a misinterpretation. So what remains? A story. A credible-sounding person, a fragment of data, a vague description. And then the audience does what audiences do. It fills the blank. Now, I'm going to do something most people don't do. I'm going to give you a handful of USO-style encounter patterns and show you how the same pattern could be read three different ways, not to ruin the mystery, to sharpen it. Pattern 1. The fast mover. A contact appears, tracks steadily, then accelerates and vanishes. Reading 1. A sensor artifact. A contact crosses a boundary where sound propagation changes. A false speed is created by geometry and water layers. Reading 2. A decoy or exercise object. A device designed to create a trackable signature, then break it. A test of how well operators can maintain contact. Reading 3. An unknown platform. A vehicle with performance beyond what's publicly admitted, not necessarily non-human, possibly simply not disclosed. Pattern 2. The vertical. A contact changes depth rapidly. Reading 1. Biological behavior. Some animals do surprising things, especially when startled by sonar. Reading 2. Misinterpreted range. If you misjudge distance, you misjudge depth change. Reading 3. An undersea vehicle with aggressive maneuvering. A platform testing boundaries. Or fleeing. Pattern 3. The silent return. A contact is visible on one sensor modality and absent on another. Reading 1. Sensor mismatch. Not all systems see the same thing. Reading 2. Stealth. A platform designed to reduce certain signatures. Reading 3. The ocean playing tricks, scattering, layering. Noise. Do you feel what's happening? The deeper we go, the more the story becomes about interpretation, not proof. And interpretation is where experiments people swear are real become psychologically irresistible, because interpretation becomes identity. Once someone believes they witnessed the impossible, it becomes part of their internal truth. Not because they're lying, because their mind has already locked the memory into meaning. Which brings us to the turning point I promised. The moment the entire documentary flips from what might be down there to what are we doing with the mystery? Here it is. The most powerful ocean floor experiment is not a machine, it's a narrative. A narrative can function as camouflage. A narrative can function as deterrence. A narrative can function as psychological warfare. And the ocean floor is the perfect place to cultivate narratives, because it's the perfect place to prevent resolution. No cameras, no crowds, no easy verification. If a rumor forms about an underwater base, it doesn't have to be true to be useful. It only has to be distracting. Think about it. If your adversary believes you have a secret seabed capability, real or imagined, they have to respond. They have to investigate. They have to allocate resources. They have to reveal their own listening methods. Even the act of chasing a rumor can expose you. So sometimes the smartest secret is not the one you hide. It's the one you hide behind. This is why, across decades, the ocean has accumulated a strange double life. On one side, real undersea programs, cables, sensors, recovery, stealth, autonomy. On the other side, the myth ecosystem, alien cities, ancient domes, glowing doors, non-human craft, and between them the public trying to connect dots with missing ink. Now we're ready to name the experiments people swear are real and evaluate them by purpose. Not to debunk everything, to understand what each story is trying to explain. Because most of these stories are not really about the ocean floor. They're about anxiety, about power, about the idea that someone else knows more than you. So in the next section, we're going to walk through the most persistent ocean floor experiment claims in the modern era, the ones that keep resurfacing, the ones that people treat like folk memory. We'll examine the Seafloor station's claim as a misread of real seabed infrastructure. We'll examine the doors and vaults claim as a blend of geology, wreckage, and the very real existence of deep recovery operations. We'll examine the USO claim not as a solved problem, but as a mirror of undersea competition and deception. And then we'll land on the ending that ties everything together, the lingering image, the one that stays. Because whether the wildest stories are true or not, the seafloor remains the same. A place where power can be exercised without applause. A place where evidence can be swallowed. A place where the unknown can be weaponized. And if you want to understand why people swear the experiments are real, you have to understand the final truth. The ocean floor isn't just hiding things, it's hiding the arguments about those things. And when you hide the argument, you let belief do the work. So let's do what the internet almost never does. Let's take the most repeated ocean floor experiment claims, one by one, and treat them like an analyst would. Not with ridicule, not with worship, with a simple question that cuts through almost every myth. If this were real, what would it be for? Because purpose leaves fingerprints. Purpose creates constraints. Purpose explains why something would be built, why it would be hidden, why it would be revisited. And purpose also exposes the stories that exist, mainly because they feel good to repeat. We're going to start with the claim that shows up everywhere in different forms. The stations, the bases, the boxes on the seabed. The idea that the ocean floor is dotted with installations, like a shadow civilization. Here's the honest version. The ocean floor is dotted with installations, not because of aliens, because of sensors. Seabed infrastructure is the quiet backbone of both science and security. Scientific seafloor stations study tectonics and currents, they watch for earthquakes, they monitor chemistry, they measure the planet's pulse. Military adjacent systems, publicly acknowledged in broad strokes and plausibly more extensive in classified detail, monitor acoustics. They listen, they track, they catalog. And the moment you accept stations can be sensor networks, you understand why people mistake them for something larger. Because a sensor node doesn't look like anything you've seen in daily life. It looks like a sealed industrial object in a place where industrial objects feel impossible. That's the first purpose test. A seafloor station is plausible if it does a job that can justify its existence. Listening, measuring, relaying. Now, what about the stories of repeat visits to the same coordinates, the maps, the forum threads, the claims that ships keep returning to a patch of ocean like they're tending a garden? That is also plausible, not because they're feeding a base, but because seafloor systems require maintenance, batteries, cables, data retrieval, sensor replacement. A node that listens for years is valuable. You don't abandon it casually. You service it. You upgrade it. You protect it. That's the second purpose test. If you see a pattern of returns to a location, you don't automatically jump to aliens. You ask what infrastructure might be there. And in the modern ocean, infrastructure is everywhere. Just not everywhere visible. Now we shift to the second major claim. The door. The vault. The underwater hangar. The seafloor feature that looks like an opening. Something unnatural, something sealed, something too clean. This is where the ocean plays its cruelest game. Because the seafloor can create forms that mimic intention. A collapsed lava tube can look like a tunnel. A fracture can look like a doorway. A landslide scar can look like a cut. A wreck can look like architecture. And then humans add a second layer of confusion. Underwater mapping is not always photographic. It is often acoustic. It is data turned into shapes. Which means a seam in the data can become a seam in the story. But, and this matters, there is a version of the vault claim that doesn't require geology. It requires history. Because if you can retrieve something from deep water, you can also interact with something in deep water. Not a city, not a civilization, but an object. Deep recovery operations prove a simple truth. The seafloor can be accessed deliberately, not casually, not cheaply, but deliberately. And once access exists, the imagination starts drawing bigger shapes. If they can lift one thing, maybe they can build another. If they can reach a wreck, maybe they can hide a device. If they can deploy a claw, maybe they can deploy a door. This is where purpose becomes the knife again. If someone built an actual vault on the seafloor, what would it be for? To store something? Why store it there, under crushing pressure, in corrosive saltwater where maintenance is expensive and failure is permanent? To hide something? Why hide it in a place that requires specialized vessels to reach? Vessels that leave traces? To protect something? From what? A real seafloor vault would require a reason so powerful it can justify the logistics. And most rumored vault stories never provide that. They provide awe, they provide mystery, but not purpose. Which means most vault claims fit one of three categories: a natural formation misread, a human object misidentified, or a narrative that survives because it can't be disproven. Now we step into the third claim, the claim that is both extremely plausible and emotionally destabilizing. The idea that the most important experiments on the ocean floor involve not weapons, but communication, not radio towers, cables. Undersea cables are the physical veins of the modern world. Bank transfers, messages, trade, images, military coordination, everything. And because cables are so important, people have built entire worlds of fear around them. Cable tapping, cable sabotage, cable black sites. Here's what is true at the level of basic logic. If you can reach a cable, you can influence the surface world. You can disrupt, you can monitor, you can threaten, you can deny. That doesn't mean every outage is sabotage. It doesn't mean every incident is a secret experiment. But it does mean the ocean floor is a strategic domain, not a mythic one, a practical one. So if someone swears there are ocean floor experiments and their story involves cables, that story has a built-in purpose: control of information, resilience, deterrence, preparation. That purpose makes the story more plausible. Not because the specific claim is proven, because the category makes sense. Now we come to the category that makes people's voices drop. USOs, the underwater unknowns. If you've listened to enough accounts, you'll notice the same detail appears again and again. The operator doesn't say, "I saw an alien craft." They say, "I saw a contact that didn't behave." That difference matters. Because contact is a language of caution. It's a way to admit uncertainty without surrendering credibility. And there are reasons the undersea world produces more unresolved contact stories than the sky. Underwater sensors are interpreting sound, not capturing images. The environment is layered. The physics are complex. The data is often classified. But there is a deeper reason. A human reason. Submariners and sonar operators live inside uncertainty. They are trained to take it seriously, and they are trained to keep it quiet. That is a recipe for folklore. Folklore doesn't require lies. It requires pressure. It requires incomplete information. It requires time. So when people swear USO encounters are evidence of non-human activity, a disciplined approach doesn't start by mocking them. It starts by asking what else those encounters could represent. An experimental unmanned system, a decoy exercise, a sensor artifact, a misclassified biological return, a foreign platform testing boundaries. And yes, if you want to keep the door slightly open in a balanced way, the possibility of something genuinely unknown. Not proven, but unknown. Because unknown is not a synonym for alien. Unknown is a status, a gap. A refusal of closure. Now let's talk about the claim that spreads faster than any other because it feels like the missing piece. The claim that some experiments on the ocean floor are not military, not scientific, but psychological. Here's what that means. It means the ocean floor is a stage for belief engineering. Not necessarily because someone sits in a room and plans a myth like a marketing campaign. Sometimes it happens naturally. Secrecy creates rumor. Rumor creates attention. Attention creates culture. Culture creates new interpretations. But sometimes, the myth becomes useful. If you're running a classified undersea program, you want to hide the details. But you also want the public narrative to be something people can't take seriously, something too theatrical, too extreme, too loaded with aliens and ancient civilizations. Because then, when someone stumbles near the truth, they get absorbed into the same myth ecosystem. They look like just another voice, just another thread, just another story. The truth doesn't need to be denied, it needs to be drowned. And what drowns truth better than the ocean? Noise. This is the turning point in the turning point. Because once you understand that myths can function as camouflage, you see the ocean floor differently. You stop asking, is there an alien base? And you start asking, what real capability could be hiding behind the alien base story? A listening system, a cable operation, a drone test range, a deep recovery practice, a stealth validation site, a maintenance hub. All of those are more plausible than a city. And all of them would benefit from the public chasing a city. Now I promised a framework. Not to kill the mystery, to make it useful. Here it is. When you hear an ocean floor experiment claim, ask 4 questions. First, what is the sensor? Is this a photograph? Is it sonar? Is it secondhand testimony? Is it a leaked screenshot with no metadata? Second, what is the environment? Depth, geology, currents, thermoclines, noise conditions. Third, what is the purpose? Listening, communication, navigation, manipulation, recovery. Fourth, what is the incentive to hide it? Defense, deterrence, proprietary technology, embarrassment, strategic ambiguity. If a claim can't answer at least one of those questions, it is probably a story designed for emotion. If it answers them too perfectly, with cinematic details, perfect villains, perfect timelines, it may be a story designed for attention. If it answers them in a messy, partial way, with uncertainty and constraint, then you treat it like something that might have brushed up against real operations. Now, we're going to return to the cold sonar room. Because we started with a return, and we're going to end with one. In the last minutes of a night watch, the ocean gets quieter, not because it's actually quieter, because your mind is tired enough to stop pretending the background noise is meaningless. That's when the operator sees a shape, a pattern, a return that doesn't fit. He freezes, because the ocean doesn't offer many clean geometries. He checks his settings, He checks his gain. He checks his filters. He looks for the mistakes first, because that's what professionals do. And then he realizes something that almost never gets said in public. Even if the contact is later explained, the experience will never feel explained, because the deep ocean is not a place where certainty is common. It is a place where uncertainty is operational. And when you spend enough time in uncertainty, you start to understand why people swear the experiments are real. Not because everyone is gullible, because the ocean is a machine for incomplete stories. It takes the world's most advanced technology and forces it to interpret shadows. It takes human institutions and gives them a place to operate without witnesses. It takes accidents and turns them into legends. It takes real secrecy and wraps it in myth. So, what are the ocean floor experiments people swear are real? Some are real in the most literal sense. Seabed sensors, deep recovery, cable interaction, autonomous tests, acoustic deception. Some are real in the psychological sense, the creation of uncertainty, the cultivation of rumors, the weaponization of the unknown, and some are real in the cultural sense, stories that survive because no one can conclusively kill them. That's the true shape of the ocean floor mystery. Not a single secret, a layered one. The seafloor is not a blank. It is not empty. It is not purely natural, and it is not fully controlled. It is a living archive of geology, of biology, of human ambition, of the projects we won't admit, of the things we don't fully understand. And in that archive, the most honest sentence you can say, without surrendering wonder, without pretending certainty, is this: there are experiments down there. The real ones are quieter than the rumors, and the rumors are louder than the truth. If you ever want to know which is which, don't start with belief. Start with purpose. Start with constraints. Start with the fact that the ocean doesn't just hide things. It changes the stories we tell about what it hides. And somewhere, right now, a sonar operator is staring at a screen, watching a return that will never be fully explained in public. Not because it's supernatural, because the deep ocean is still the last place on Earth where power can move. And nobody can truly watch.